Dad told me to leave in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. No warning, no discussion, just a flat statement delivered between passing dishes and forced pleasantries. One moment I was pouring gravy, the next he was telling me I needed to learn independence, as if I hadn't been silently funding nearly everything that kept that household running. The table went silent. No one spoke up for me. Not my mother, not my sister. And in that quiet, something inside me clicked into place. Not with rage, but with understanding. Because if they genuinely believed I was the dependent one, they were about to discover exactly how mistaken they'd been, and what that error would cost them. Before I explain what happened when the bills came due, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to know how many people recognize this pattern. I didn't storm out immediately. I sat there for a beat, letting the amber glow of the chandelier wash over me, the way it used to when I was young, before I understood what that warmth actually concealed. From an outsider's view, my family resembles the ideal holiday gathering: roasted turkey, seasonal centerpieces, conversation that sounds genuine if you don't listen carefully. But when you're raised within those walls, you notice every fracture in the facade, every tonal shift, every pause that speaks louder than the words surrounding it. My name is Miranda. I'm 38, and for most of my existence, I believed that if I contributed enough, if I appeared enough, if I demonstrated my value enough, I'd finally secure a seat at that table that didn't feel provisional. At the office, I oversee projects, budgets, initiatives, but at home, I'm the daughter who's too capable, the sister who's too accomplished, the family member who's simultaneously depended upon and despised for it. My father, Richard, has always controlled the emotional temperature of our home. When he's pleased, everyone exhales. When he's displeased, everyone freezes. Today, he was glacial. My mother, Patricia, studied her cranberry sauce like it held answers. My sister Lauren kept checking her phone, though I could see from the angle that the screen was dark. My brother-in-law Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. It wasn't lost on me that everyone present had accepted my help at some point, quietly, repeatedly. When Lauren needed her business loan co-signed, she called me. When Marcus couldn't make their mortgage payment, I covered it. When my parents' property taxes kept climbing, I handled them without mention. I did it because I believed family meant supporting each other. I did it because I didn't want them to struggle. But primarily, I did it because I thought it would prove I mattered, despite all evidence suggesting otherwise. Growing up, my father used to say, "Capable people carry the burden so others don't have to." I didn't realize he meant one specific person, me. He never taught Lauren how to handle pressure. He taught her how to deflect it. And she did, again and again, while I convinced myself this was what family meant. But as I sat there absorbing the weight of his words, "You need to learn independence," I felt something inside me reorganize. The equation had never balanced, and perhaps it never would. I took a measured sip of wine, letting the bitter notes settle on my tongue. Around me, conversation resumed in awkward and unnatural spurts, like everyone desperately hoped to pretend nothing had occurred. But something had, something irreversible. And as I watched them avoid my gaze, I understood this wasn't the start of a breakdown. It was the start of clarity. The remainder of dinner felt like observing a storm everyone pretended wasn't approaching. You could hear it in the way silverware clinked against plates a fraction too loudly, in the way my mother's breathing caught whenever my father moved, in the way Lauren's smile looked painted on, brittle and false. I remained quiet, not from intimidation, but because silence reveals people's true nature. Richard continued as though nothing had happened. He discussed the game, the weather, the neighbor's new car. Not once did he look at me. That was his method. He didn't argue, he dismissed. And being dismissed by your own father cuts deeper than any accusation. At one point, Lauren finally spoke. "Dad has a point, Miranda," she mumbled, eyes fixed downward. "You've been disconnected lately. Maybe some space would be healthy." Disconnected, the word people use when they've forgotten the last dozen times you appeared for them. I didn't reply. I simply observed her fidget uncomfortably, as if my silence communicated more than any retort could. Then Marcus added, attempting lightness. If things are tight financially, just let us know. No shame in asking for help. Asking them for help? I nearly laughed. But before I could respond, Richard interrupted again, his tone measured but cutting. Miranda, dear, we can't continue pretending this works. You depend too heavily on this family. It's time you stood on your own feet. There it was, the complete statement, the one that would fracture everything. Learn independence. He'd said it before, but now he enunciated each syllable, deliberately, like he wanted each word to brand itself into me. And the worst part wasn't his statement, it was how the others permitted it. No one objected, no one questioned him. Their silence wasn't confusion, it was endorsement. That was when something in me shifted. Not shattered, shattering implies chaos. This was clarity, settling like a puzzle piece finding its place. I excused myself to the restroom, not to hide, simply to think. Inside, the mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, not because she looked older or exhausted, but because she finally saw the truth. I wasn't being expelled from the family. I'd never truly been included. When I returned to the table, they barely registered my presence. My chair scraped softly as I sat, but no one glanced up, not even my father. That was my confirmation. I collected my jacket, draping it across my arm. Richard finally looked at me, but not with concern, with irritation, as if I was disrupting his dinner. "Where are you headed?" he asked. I met his eyes, calm and certain. "Home." For an instant, something crossed his face, uncertainty, possibly even alarm, before he suppressed it. No one stopped me as I walked to the entry. They didn't comprehend yet, but they would. The November air outside struck me with a clarity the dining room never could. I walked to my car without a backward glance, not from pride, but because I didn't trust myself to give them even that final acknowledgement. They hadn't earned it. My hands were steady when I started the engine, steadier than they'd been in years. By the time I arrived at my condo downtown, the shock had faded, replaced by something quieter, sharper. Determination. The kind that doesn't stem from anger, but from finally acknowledging the truth. I entered, closed the door, and let the stillness settle. My home had always been my sanctuary, but that evening it felt different. It felt like it was waiting for me to choose. I didn't weep, I didn't rage. I walked to my office, opened my laptop, and began working, not to leave, to mark an ending. Each keystroke became symbolic. Every document closed felt like a boundary drawn. I opened my financial software, the screen's blue glow illuminating the room. One by one, I reviewed the tabs I'd been avoiding confronting. Payments for my parents' utilities, insurance for Lauren's business, the beach house expenses, silent contributions I'd made for years without expecting acknowledgement. Seeing the accumulated totals was like watching a lifetime distill into numbers, stark, simple, undeniable. I hovered over the automatic payment settings. Then I canceled them. Not from malice, from necessity. They'd instructed me to learn independence, so I was. Right then, in the most literal, logical way possible. The beach house utilities came next. The electricity, the water, the maintenance services I'd funded while rarely being invited to visit. A property they treated as theirs while I paid the expenses. My fingers moved through each account, terminating what should never have started. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Each confirmation felt like releasing a breath I'd been holding for decades. But the final action came when I opened a file I hadn't examined in years. The documents for the beach house deed. My attorney had insisted I include a contingency clause when I purchased it in my parents' names. At the time, I'd agreed because it seemed prudent. Now, it felt prophetic. If the property was ever disputed, if my parents attempted to sell without my consent, if they violated the terms in any manner, ownership automatically returned to me. No battle, no negotiation, just a straightforward legal consequence. I leaned back, letting the reality settle. They believed they held control. They thought I was the one who needed them, but the truth had always been inverted. I closed the laptop, the room falling into darkness except for the city lights beyond the window. It wasn't vengeance, not yet. It was preparation, because the moment they realized what my silence truly meant, everything would transform, and I would be ready. 4 days elapsed before my phone rang, not with worry, not with apology, but with expectation. Lauren's name illuminated the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, long enough for her to register the hesitation. "Lauren, what did you do?" she demanded, bypassing any pretense of civility. "The beach house is freezing, nothing's working, and we were supposed to host Marcus's family this weekend." "Then they'll have to stay elsewhere," I said evenly. "What is wrong with you?" Her voice cracked with disbelief, as if I'd violated some implicit agreement to continue enabling them indefinitely. "I stopped funding things I'm excluded from," I replied. There was silence, heavy, angry, bewildered. Then she launched into a speech about family obligation, loyalty, sacrifice. Interesting how people invoke those concepts only when they want something from you. I let her finish, then said only this: "You told me I was too dependent, so I became independent." And I ended the call. The next contact wasn't from Lauren. It wasn't from Marcus. It came from my mother, a tentative, tremulous voicemail asking if we could discuss this like adults. The tone was familiar, desperate but disguised as reasonable. They weren't concerned about me, they were concerned about what my absence cost them. 3 more days passed before it escalated. A certified letter arrived at my door. Legal letterhead, return address from a law firm across town. Inside was a petition filed by my father requesting judicial review of the beach house deed, claiming he'd been under duress and hadn't comprehended the terms, requesting the property transfer to him and my mother. I sat at my kitchen counter reading the papers in a silence so profound it almost hummed. They hadn't even called first. They went directly to attempting to take something that wasn't theirs, not by mistake or misunderstanding, but by choice. That was it, the moment the line stopped being ambiguous. I contacted my attorney that afternoon. She reviewed the documents, exhaled slowly, and shook her head. "They have no grounds," she said. "The contingency clause ensures ownership reverts to you automatically if they act against the agreement. They filed this petition, which means they triggered the clause themselves. The beach house is yours again, legally effective now." I thanked her, not because I was pleased, but because I finally felt certainty, something solid beneath my feet after years of bending for everyone else. When my attorney suggested we arrange a meeting with them, I selected the restaurant near their neighborhood, the one with exposed brick and ambient lighting, familiar enough to keep emotions contained, public enough to prevent raised voices. They arrived together, Richard rigid with indignation, Patricia avoiding eye contact, Lauren visibly tense, Marcus trailing behind, looking miserable. I had already chosen a table near the back. They settled across from me like defendants entering court. My father spoke first. "Miranda, this has gone far enough. You've made your statement." I studied his expression. Not a hint of remorse, only frustration that his strategy had failed. "Dad," I said steadily, "I didn't file anything. You did." "Because you left us no choice," he snapped. "Cutting off the house, the utilities, you can't expect us to—" "I didn't expect anything," I said. "That's the distinction between us." His face hardened, But before he could interrupt, I placed a manila envelope on the table. Not legal papers, my own documentation. 15 years of payments, itemized lists, printed records of utilities, maintenance for their home, business support, insurance, medical expenses, evidence of every silent contribution they'd chosen to forget. "What's this?" Lauren asked, voice uncertain. "Everything I've covered since I was 23, I said. My father's eyes scanned the first page and stopped. He blinked. "You paid this much?" "Yes." "For all of us?" Patricia whispered. "Yes." Marcus exhaled sharply but said nothing. "So what?" Lauren said, though her voice wavered. "You think this makes you superior? We never asked you to do this." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "You expected it." A heavy silence fell across the table, the truth resting between us. I continued, calm but deliberate. "Dad told me I was dependent, so I stopped being dependent. I stopped paying the utilities. I stopped covering the beach house. I stopped funding the lifestyle you built on the assumption I'd never walk away." My father stiffened. "You're being theatrical." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being honest." I slid another document forward, the contingency clause. "This is the legal agreement for the beach house. The moment you contested the ownership, everything reverted to me automatically. You didn't lose the house because of me. You lost it because you tried to claim something that wasn't yours." My father's face went blank. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain. Patricia's hands trembled. Lauren stared at nothing. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear. They weren't just surprised, they were exposed. I let the silence extend long enough for comprehension to sink in. Then I spoke softly, almost gently. "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this because I should have established boundaries 15 years ago. You told me I was dependent, but you were depending on me, and now you'll have to depend on yourselves." My mother found her voice finally. "We're your family. I know. I loved you like family. I supported you like family, but you didn't treat me like one." I stood, smoothing my coat. From my wallet, I withdrew a single dollar bill, the symbolic inheritance that mirrored how they valued my contributions. Small, dismissible, unappreciated. I placed it in the center of the table. "That's what remains. Everything else I already gave, and you never even noticed." No one moved. Not my father, not my mother, not Lauren, whose blank stare flickered into something almost like understanding. Too late. I stepped away from the table. "Miranda," my mother called, voice breaking slightly. I paused just long enough to hear it, but I didn't turn around. Some stories need a closing line. This one needed a door closing. The restaurant's ambient music continued as I left, cold air rushing around me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for leaving. I felt liberated. In the weeks that followed, the quiet felt different. It wasn't the kind that comes from being shut out. It was the kind you earn after finally speaking truth aloud. My condo seemed brighter somehow. The morning sun hit the windows at perfect angles, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake up bracing for someone else's emergency. My attorney confirmed the paperwork. The beach house was legally mine again. No dispute, no complications, just a clean reversion triggered by their own actions. She asked if I wanted to pursue additional damages. I declined. Justice didn't need to be loud to be real. A week later, my mother sent a brief text. No scripture, no guilt, just a line saying they were figuring things out. I hoped they were. Maybe losing the support they'd taken for granted would force them to grow in ways they hadn't needed to before. As for me, I took a long drive up the coast that weekend, letting the ocean wind clear my head. I felt lighter, not because I'd won something, but because I'd finally released a burden I was never meant to carry. I hadn't abandoned my family, I'd simply stopped abandoning myself. In time, perhaps they'll understand why I drew the line. Perhaps they won't. But I've learned that boundaries aren't punishments. They're invitations for people to meet you with the respect you've always shown them. And if they can't, you continue forward anyway. My life is quieter now, more stable, finally mine.
If this story resonates with something in your life, share your thoughts below. And if you want more real family stories with endings that finally make sense, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.